right, for everyone there that may not know who I am, my name is Vincent Slinrow. I work for Juniper Networks, and I am currently the vice chair on the NANOG board of directors. I had asked to introduce a very close friend of mine. We go way back, junior high years, so no asking embarrassing stories because there's a ton of them. Looking back throughout these years, childhood, teenage, adulthood, navigating careers, and how to deal with change as well as empowering change. These are all points in life that shape and define us. And how do we navigate diversity and inclusion throughout all these stages of life is very important. We have all seen the positive changes throughout the NANA community via our DEI initiatives, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And now I'd like to formally introduce Joy Canonigo. Joy has over 20 years of experience designing and leading enterprise HR initiatives, ranging from executive to frontline development, DE&I learning programs, change and talent management. Joy graduated from Northwestern University with a master's in learning and organizational change. She lives in the Chicagoland area with her husband, 2 sons, and 2 dogs. She's passionate about taking a human-centered approach to talent development and believes that your difference is your differentiator. Her passion is shaped by her immigrant parents, being neurodivergent, and being the mother of an adult with autism. Joy was recently recognized as a notable leader in DEI from Crane's Chicago Business for her work in advancing DE&I and Discover Financial Services. So please welcome to the stage, Joy Canonigo.
Thank you, Vince. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I heard a little bit of a good afternoon. It's still morning. Then good morning, everyone. My pronouns are she and her. And for those with visual needs, I am a middle-aged Filipino woman wearing a shirt with a bunch of diverse women and a pink jacket. I am honored to be here to talk about DE&I. We are going to talk about inclusion as soon as my slide hits over. Here we go. There we go. We're here to talk about inclusive leadership. This is a little bit of an interactive session. And when I say interactive, I mean very, very simply interactive. If you have a right or left hand, if you just raise it, that's the level of interaction we're going to have, right? So my big first question to you all is, how many of you sit in a leadership position? If I can see a show of hands on those who sit, okay, we'll roughly say half the room. Okay, how many of you believe that talking about DE&I topics and issues can be challenging? Show of hands. Like gender, race, religion. All right, we got a majority of the hands up. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is your leadership, right? And I am from Discover, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Discover to set a context, because these are concepts that we talk to our leaders about. And so you'll see a little bit about the impact. Now, if you're not familiar with Discover, credit card, we're a bank, but largely people know us for being a credit card. We have a global footprint. And this is our belief statement around DE&I. We actually believe that diverse perspectives make us stronger, and we believe that all should feel a sense of value, have a sense of belonging, be treated equitably. And because of that, we organize against the D, the E, and the I in DE&I. We have representation goals across the organization, equity goals for our talent systems, and then inclusion goals, usually generated by our engagement survey. But again, I share that with you to set the context. Now, the results of that investment in DE&I are clear. We do have higher engagement scores than those benchmarked against in our engagement scores, and we have something called an inclusion index, which we're proud to say that we have high scores within that as well. But I did say we're here to talk about your leadership, and I want to unpack leadership for a moment. If there is one thing that you need to be a leader, I just want you to think in your head, what is that one thing? And if you're so inclined, feel free to shout that out. What do we think is the one thing you need to be a leader? Compassion, I love that. Patience, for sure, right? Anyone else? A sense of community, I love that. Beautiful. Now, what? Respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, right? Lovely. Integrity, love that word too. Self-awareness, yes. I think the previous speaker talked about authenticity, the congruence between what you say and what you do. I love that. A what? Transcendence of ego. You're getting big on me. I love it. Now, I'm not going to disagree with any of those things. I actually agree with you. All those are important. But if I had to distill the one thing you need to be a leader, I would say it's followers, right? Because if you're like, this way, everyone, and no one's behind you, what's going on? Are you actually leading? And that's an important concept for me because following you is a choice, right? When people choose to follow you, you get discretionary effort, you get proactive behavior. When they choose not to follow you, the best that you can hope for is compliance. And you know what that feels like. You got to lay breadcrumbs for them every single way for them to come along. And I would argue that's just not leadership at all, because without you, nothing moves. So following you is a choice. People have to say yes. And in order for them to say yes, fundamentally, they have to understand a little bit about you. Like questions like, who the heck are you? And why should I follow you? Now, I want you to reflect about how many of you can answer that question, right? Who are you and why should I follow you? Now, I asked how many leaders in the room, right? If leadership is about followership, do you actually need a title for people to follow you? No. What do you need to do? You need to behave as a leader and invite people to follow you, right? Because following you is a choice. So I believe if you're part of this organization, Nanog, aren't you trying to lead within the internet space, right? I want you to think about your family dynamic. Are you a leader in that space? Do you have people that you are trying to enlist to follow you, right? In your work environment, if you don't have a title, are you trying to influence people and get followership to get work done, right? If so, you're a leader. Now, leadership, to me, has always been a set of behaviors. It's not necessarily a title. If you are waiting for a title, you can take that route. I would just argue you're going the long way. If you want to be a leader, you just show up and you behave as such. So I ask again, by a show of hands, how many leaders do we have in this room who's trying to lead a cause, a purpose, people, right? Then this message is for you about inclusive leadership. So I'm going to do a little bit of a visualization exercise. The visualization is actually the most important part. So for this, I'm going to ask that you close your eyes. It's going to be about a 30-second visualization exercise, so it shouldn't take too long. But go ahead and close your eyes. And before we start this, we're going to take just a big breath in and a controlled breath out. And as I tell you a story, I'd like you to imagine the people that you meet in your mind's eye with as much detail as you possibly can. So here we go. You are late. You are waiting for your rideshare driver so that you can catch the plane to the NAGNAG conference. You close up the meeting with your team, you rush out, and the look on the driver's face is one of impatience. You rush to the airport, you get there just in time to board your plane, and the smile on the pilot's face just slowly melts your stress away. The next evening, you go to a networking event where you meet a couple celebrating their anniversary. You have a wonderful time talking to that couple. You go to bed, and you wake up because you're excited to hear the CEO of the hottest tech firm speak. Okay, open your eyes. Now, I asked you to imagine the people that you meet in your mind's eye with as much detail as you possibly can. So was your rideshare driver transgender? Was the pilot Black? Was the couple that you met a same-sex couple? Was the CEO of the hottest tech firm a woman? Now, your answers don't have to be yes, yes across the board. It's actually not the point of the exercise whatsoever. The point of that exercise is to raise awareness of who you see, and equally important, for the folks that you don't see. You see, as leaders, you make decisions for the people that you see. And you don't necessarily take into account the needs of the people that you don't see. Right? And as leaders, we have a responsibility to care for everyone. And so what I hope that brings is awareness, right? As leaders of the people we often make decisions for, and the ones that we need to open up our aperture for and start bringing in to the conversation. So the few minutes we have together is about opening up your aperture. And so what we're going to cover is concepts around race and human dynamics and what causes tension between people. And then opportunities to install new inclusive practices so we bring people together, because ultimately that's what leadership is about. Now, Gallup did a poll a couple years ago, and they asked, has your country become more diverse in the past 2 decades? Show of hands here, how many people believe that the US has become more diverse in the past 2 decades? Few hands up. Oh, we got a majority of the hands up. Okay, so when Pew did this research, they went to 27 countries, and 29% of respondents said, hey, we agree, our country has become more diverse. And when they asked follow-up questions like, do you favor more diversity or do you oppose more diversity? 45% said they favor more diversity and 23% said that they oppose. So if you are influencing and leading people, this is a dynamic that you're moving through, that there are some people who do not favor diversity. Now, I'm going to share with you some global stats. Did you know by the end of this century, the world's population is expected to stop growing? World's population by the end of this century. In fact, Africa is the only country who is expected to have population growth through the end of the century. India has surpassed China in terms of being the most popular country, and 90 countries are expected to see population decline. Now, we are going to see population growth, so a lot of that is through migration and immigration. So as leaders, there's implications to your leadership. Increased knowledge in race and culture, generational issues, gender issues, and disability issues, right? As we anticipate a largely aging population. Now, did you know since the 1960s that the US has largely grown in population size because of immigration? And that 4 out of 10 in the US population, based on the 2020 census report, identify as a person of color. And 50% of the population 16 years and under identify as people of color. And that by 2032, people of color will be a majority of the American working class. So diversity is a fact, not just in the US, but we see a global trend. Now, this is also one facet of diversity, right? Race is one facet. We look at diversity on a spectrum, and the diversity is past gender, right? Religion, and your work experience, your geolocation, your accent. These are all forms of diversity that are important to leverage. If I take a step further and share with you a study from Korn Ferry in 2018 that suggests that by 2030, the demand for skilled workers will outstrip supply. In fact, they're anticipating an 85 million shortage in skilled workers, translating into over 8 trillion in untapped revenue. Now, their map in 2020 looked like this. This is where there were deficits in skilled talent workers, and they predicted in 2030 this is what it would grow to. Look at that talent deficit in 2030 in certain areas, and note where there's a surplus in India. So think about the impact of that on where we get talent, how we leverage our talent, the ability to work across countries, time zone being an inclusion factor, more so than it has been before. So here's the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every day, people show up with these three questions in mind. How do I know it's safe to be my authentic self? How do I know I'll be accepted and I'll belong? And how do I know I'll thrive? We as leaders, we look at representation. Because if we see people who look like us in levels of leadership, then what we realize is the ability to get there is possible. Inclusion is about our behaviors, and equity is about systems. Now, I asked you whether or not talking about D&I issues was challenging. A majority of you said yes. So I'm going to talk about race, because I would argue it's one of the more difficult topics within D&I to talk about. So I want you to think about, what is race? This is nothing you have to shout out or share, but in your mind, when you think about race, what definition comes to mind? It could be the US Census definition of what race is, right? The census reports we have to fill in. But if it's anything different from that, think about what your own definition of race is. Because I have some research to share with you about race that I find is very interesting. Like, race is a modern construct. It's a social invention. Right? Because if we look at biology, we see that there's no basis for race. There is not one genetic marker that identifies me as a Filipina. Right? There is no one genetic marker that identifies someone as Italian, Brazilian, American. So there is no biologic or genetic basis for race. If we look back at ancient societies, we did not divide people up according to their physical differences. In fact, separation was based on religion, class, status, and language. So, the best way we can identify what race is that beginning with slavery, we used race to explain why some could be denied the rights and freedom that others were granted. Now, how did that happen? We've got to take a look back in time. You see, the invention of warships spurred on an unprecedented amount of colonialism that the world had never seen. And that generated an amazing amount of revenue for European countries. You see, when you invent these ships, it enables colonization, transportation, and when you colonize land, there's a lot of things that need to happen. Mining for gold and silver, agriculture, right? And all of that requires human labor. Now, where are you going to go ahead and get this human labor? Well, colonization gave birth to the transatlantic slave trade. And this is how race became a class. Now, unfortunately, we moved over 12 million Africans into enslavement. 85% of those enslaved people went to the Brazil islands and Caribbean islands and Brazil, 10% to the US, and 5% to Europe. And this is how race became a class. Now, why am I bringing this up to you? Because as we think about achievement and meritocracy and awarding people for intellect and contribution, right? This is where equity comes into play. We have to understand the systems that interfere with the ability to get to achievement, meritocracy, recognition, for cognitive abilities, for contributions, right? And race, unfortunately, is an obstacle to that because we built systems and infrastructure that said, if you were from historically Afro countries, you were at the bottom of the class system. And if you were at wealthy European countries, you were at the top of the class system. So we've spent years trying to dismantle those systems, and we have years to go. And it's going to take leadership to shift systems and policies and ideas to get to true meritocracy, right? And so understanding of how systems contrary or compete with one another for what we're trying to achieve is very, very important. So here's a little bit of a reflection for you. I want you to think about your personal relationships, those closest to you. And there's a bullet list. I want you to reflect and just do a mental accounting of how many facets of that diversity circle that you touch. Just do a little bit of mental accounting, right? Your best friends in college, grade school, your close colleagues. Second reflection for you is influencers. These are outside your personal relationships. These are your podcast, your Audibles, your Kindle authors, sports figures. Outside of your personal circle, how many facets of that diversity spectrum do you touch? And here's my reflection as you bring those two together, right? Where do you have more diversity? Because if you have limited diversity in your personal relationships, I would say that's okay. You didn't choose the family you were born into. You didn't choose the schools that you went to. But how much choice do you have in this list? And I would argue you have 100% choice. And if your personal relationships and your influencers match one another, I would encourage you to reflect that maybe you're perpetuating a pattern that was built early on that could serve to be broken. And that we bring in more individuals into your network, because the only way we are going to be able to address unconscious bias is not by someone standing on stage like me telling you to manage your unconscious bias. It's not through a web course that tells you that unconscious bias has detrimental effects. The number one thing I would argue to address unconscious bias is proximity, meaning getting close to difference. Having people in your network who represents the pool that you're going out to influence, the purpose or mission that you're going after, and getting proximate to that talent, to that pool to learn more about them. That's how you deal with unconscious bias. If you took a course, great, waste of time, right? Instead, get close to the people that you are trying to lead, that you're trying to influence, get to know them, ask questions, make an investment, and you'll manage your unconscious bias. So now, I'll tell you, that's really important. I spent a lot of time saying, hey, you should manage your unconscious bias, but I will also admit that biologically, we don't like difference. We're hardwired to move away from difference, and this is rooted in our DNA once upon a time when we were tribal, right? And we were at resource scarcity, and we were competing for resources. So those who didn't look like us were competition. They were the enemy. We didn't like them. But those who did look like us were part of our tribe. Well, there was safety. So when we're going out to lead and saying, let's pull people together, note that the natural biological reaction for people is to move away from difference. This is why I believe leadership is so important, because leaders bring people together. They actually go against their biology and say, I understand that there is difference, but there's also commonality between us. Let me show you how. And this is why proximity is really important. So we have to be active in bringing people together, and we have to be intentional about bringing people together because our biology suggests they will naturally move apart. So I want you to think about a time where you felt like an outsider. Right? Did you know the pain that we experience from physical pain lights up the same parts of our brain the way it does when we experience emotional pain? That our brain does not differentiate physical pain from emotional pain. Pain is pain to your brain. So when we exclude someone, it's like punching them in the gut. So inclusion is a business imperative. Inclusion is an imperative for this organization to bring in greater membership and greater ideas. Now, I want you to think of a time where you felt included. And there's a big word when we feel included that comes out. And that word, is trust. There you go. Now, if I asked each and every one of you what trust meant, I'd probably get 20 different definitions of what trust is. But the example of trust that I'm going to share with you is a leadership perspective. And here's the scenario that we'll go through. And this is actually an economist view on trust. Let's say you had $100. If you gave $100 to a perfect stranger, that would balloon to $400. Now, if that stranger was feeling generous, that stranger may give you back $200. So if you gave a stranger $100, there's a probability, maybe small, that you would get $200 back. Give me a show of hands. How many of you would give a stranger $100? 1, 2, 4. Show of hands. Okay, how about if that stranger wasn't a stranger, it was a loved one? How many of you, show of hands, would give a loved one $100? Some of you wouldn't give $100 to a stranger or a loved one. You're like, no way. It's even worse. Would not give a loved one a penny. Okay, for those of you who gave a loved one $100, would you even care of getting $200 back? Probably not, right? The accounting goes away. We don't care about that. Some of you do, but maybe not everyone. So here's the perspective of leadership that I want to share with you, right? As a leader, when you have direct reports, when you have people following you, isn't this what we do all the time? We actually have to give. For all intents and purposes, they're a stranger, right? We have to give to get back, right? We make investments in people. And we don't know if we're going to get a return. We don't know if they're going to get the job done the way we need them to get the job done, right? We don't know. But we make the investment and we hope for the return, right? We make the investment and we hope for the return. So as leaders, trust is about the power you give away. Think about that, right? When you were thinking about trust, it might have been, well, they have to earn my trust. I got to make sure that people need to do this and that in order to give my trust. But leadership is an entirely different thing, right? We empower people. That's why trust is about giving power away. When I give power to you, I empower you. And you go out and you do great things. And it means a whole lot to you. That's why it triples, right? That amount. So, question for you all to reflect on, who do you give power to? Who do you make the investment in, right? And even a bigger question is, do they fit the same profile? Are you making investments in people who look like you? People who believe the same things as you? Or are you diversifying those investments? Are you looking at diverse talents to make the investment and give power to? Because if you have a portfolio, you all know the fundamental rule that diverse investments breeds a stronger portfolio, right? So trust is about giving power and diversifying that giving of power to others. So I'm going to add a layer of neuroscience to this because Paul Zak, what he did is he took this economist view on trust and he took blood samples for folks who received the $400 and the $200. And what he did is he wanted to find out, is there a chemical that is released when you receive this money that helps facilitate trust? And what he found is that in 95% of test subjects, he did find a chemical. And that chemical was oxytocin. Now, I need to be clear, right? I did say oxytocin, not Oxycontin. Right? Joy is not recommending that you get Oxycontin into your system, right? I am recommending that you get oxytocin into your system. And what produces oxytocin? Well, it's connection and trust, right? Or touch. So this is the reason why our loved ones, we tend to have higher levels of trust. Not the ones who wouldn't give $100, but maybe everyone else, right? We have higher level of trust because we hug them, we touch them. So that release of oxytocin facilitates more trust. Now, what inhibits oxytocin? Well, stress and testosterone. Now, did you know that women have testosterone? Yes. They just have less testosterone than men. Because they have less testosterone than men, biologically, does that mean women have a higher probability of facilitating trust? Yes. And I will make the play for gender parity, because women have the opportunity to facilitate trust at higher levels. And could we not use a little more trust and a little less conflict in life, right? So diversity is important. Gender parity, even from a biological standpoint, is important. Now I'm going to layer in another level of research from John Gottman. And what he studies couples, longitudinal studies, 10, 15, 20-year mark. And he could predict with 90% accuracy if couples would stay together just by watching them fight. How many of you would like John Gottman to watch you and your significant other fight and predict whether or not you'll stay together? Maybe the ignorance is bliss. But he did this just by watching one interaction of them fight. He predicted with 90% accuracy whether or not that couple would stay together. And there's some key learnings that we can pull in terms of facilitating trust. And what he came up with was the 5-to-1 ratio. You need 5 oxytocin moments for every 1 moment of conflict. That's how couples stay together. That's how healthy relationships stay healthy. Now think about that, 5-to-1, right? You might be thinking, so I have to buy my wife flowers 5 times for every time we get on a flight. I'm not saying that at all. Let me give you some examples of what oxytocin moments are. Active listening, being present, affection and humor, inquiry and advocacy. Now, does anyone know what the average attention span is? 20, oh, I wish it was 20 seconds. Can you imagine if it was 20 seconds? Microsoft did this study, right? And I think in 2008, it was 12 seconds. And then when they repeated in 2012, it dropped to 8 seconds. 8-second attention span, right? So you can argue that attention is our most precious resource, right? Because people will give you 8 seconds before it's gone. So your attention to those that you are leading is an oxytocin moment, meaning put down the phone, full attention, let's listen to what they have to say. That's an oxytocin moment. Demonstrating empathy, humor, right? And all of those things build a bank, right? Because we want to try to get to that 5-to-1 ratio because you're going to have conflict. How many of you are scared of saying the wrong thing when it comes to DE&I? I don't want to say the wrong thing. There's words and language that I don't even get. And then I say one thing and it gets blown out of proportion and people get really upset, right? I hear it all the time. The reason why I don't want to participate in DE&I or I find it hard to participate in DE&I is because I don't want to say the wrong thing. Let me give you a tip. I really hope it's going to help you work through that. You will. There you go. Every single person in this room will make a mistake when it comes to DE&I, myself included. Myself all the time, and I am in this field. Here's the thing, there is not one person in this entire world who knows all the cultural nuances to be able to show up perfectly and say the right thing so that people don't feel offended. That's just a fact. So that cannot be your barrier to entry, right? People will always say the wrong thing. I say the wrong thing. You say the wrong thing. So that's not the issue anymore. Instead, what I would encourage you to do is recover. That's what you need to focus on, is your recovery. So when someone tells you that you've done or said the wrong thing, how you show up in that moment, right? Because here's what we could do. We could say, well, I didn't mean that. And I was really well intended. You just took it the wrong way. And that's the problem. You, not me. You took it the wrong way. Because I'm very well intended and I am a very good person. And because I'm well intended and a very good person, whatever I say, you need to understand that it's not ill intended. Right? So we can show up that way. Or we can show up and say, thank you for letting me know. It wasn't my intention to offend. What could I have said moving forward? That's it. Right? And that recovery is huge for people. Instead of denying, because when we deny, we don't let the information in that we need to change, right? So, oxytocin moments are more about showing up authentically, letting information in, even though that information may hurt because it wasn't what we intended. But as leaders, we are accountable to outcome, and we own that outcome. Right? And we own that outcome by standing in a posture of leadership and accepting it. Here are turning away behaviors, right? This is ignoring peace offerings, stop trying, negative labels. These things will happen. So I'm going to encourage you to embrace them and instead not focus on avoiding these situations, but focus on making sure that you recover and you build up a bank of connection. Conflict is a part of life. It starts off when we're kids and it never ends, right? So our choice cannot be to avoid conflict, but instead to step into a posture of leadership and bring people together. So, any questions before we say goodbye? Because then I have a favor from you all. If there are no questions. Ooh, we are, there's going to be a network event in Avalon for D&I, and we're going to have a little bit of a D&I lens there. So if you're interested, would love to have you come in there and network with others and help people feel included at that event. So there's going to be some icebreakers, some questions that we're going to ask you to engage with others at that event. All right, questions about D&I? Hello.
Hello, I'm T. Mark Jones with Internet Systems Corporation. Not a question, just wanted to comment. I thought it was a beautiful and well presented presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, T. Mark. I really appreciate that. Perfect. All right. I think we have a question.
Yeah, sorry, I know we're close to time. So Kat Renee with Microsoft. I wanted again, thank you for your presentation. A lot of us work at different companies, varying in size. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can partner maybe, or any suggestions you have for approaching our human resource departments and that kind of thing when it comes to DEI. Thank you.
Yeah. So approaching your HR department in terms of having more discussions about DEI stuff, right? Yeah. So the HR folks don't like it when I say this, but you're the customer, right? HR is the service, the business is the customer. And customer demands are important, right? And we should be reacting to customer demands. So as the customer, I would absolutely engage in a conversation with your HR team about things that you can see be improved, and then be a leader, What I often say is leaders go first. In challenging times, leaders go first. And leadership is not born when things are great, right? Leadership is born when things are challenging and people need to be brought together and they step into that void and they take on the mantle of, hey, let's come together, let's navigate. So along with a suggestion for HR as the customer, because your voice is very powerful, I would bring your hands, your head, and your heart, right? And get into the work with them to make the change that they need. Great. Thank you once again, and hopefully we'll see you at the DE&I networking event.